Well, hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Unbreakable You. Today I have been, I'm going to redo that again. Hold on. Well, hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Unbreakable You. I am so glad to have a guest returning today, and it is author and extraordinary psychotherapist Robert Jackman. You all might have remembered the episode that I had with him. I guess it was maybe last year. I don't know.
Mhm.
I had you on last year, and Robert is the author of Healing Your Wounded Child or Healing Your Inner Child. I don't even have that book in front of me.
Healing Your Lost Inner Child.
Your Lost Inner Child, which is a great book, which really is one of my most downloadable episodes. And also, we've got you on YouTube as well. And so a lot of people have really, really resonated with that book. And you have written a new book, and I'm putting this up on video for everyone to see on YouTube, which is Healing Your Wounded Relationship.
Yep.
And I love this book. It is kind of a personal read for me, as well as a professional read for me.
Mhm.
And I think it's one of the most important books out there right now that I've read, that I'm so happy to have you back on the show. So welcome, Robert.
Thank you so much. I love being back here on your show with you and talking with you again. And thank you for your kind words. And thank you for reading my book. I really appreciate that.
So tell us a little bit about what got you to start this, or to write this new book, and kind of the relevance of it as it relates to your other book.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I kept seeing couples come in and for therapy, and them not really understanding why they were getting so upset when their partner would do certain things, and they would have these big sort of outsized reactions when things would happen. And what I began to do was really explain about the inner child wounding and how that was showing up in their relationships. And what I noticed was when I sort of gave them this condensed course in inner child work, in relationship to their couples work, they began to really understand what was happening. That, the wife wasn't talking with her 36-year-old husband, she was talking with, his 5-year-old inner child self who carried all this wounding and who was throwing a tantrum. And so what I found was when I began to translate that for these couples, they began to have much more compassionate understanding. They began to kind of relax a little bit more and not take it as personally, because really it's that wounding that's showing up over and over. And so that's how it relates to the first book, because the first book is all about healing your lost inner child, that inner child wounding. And so that's how they both relate to each other.
So I really want to point out to the listeners that you do not need to be in a relationship for this book to make sense.
No, no.
And I think you have, especially in the beginning, um, I think what it would help is if you've left the relationship, which I think a good majority of my audience is kind of in between, or they're getting a divorce, or
Mm.
and then they're probably dipping their feet into a new relationship or thinking about it. So this book is very, very timely for anyone who is in that place. Uh, for me, as I've, left my, divorced twice, right? So this is perfect because your book just shows those patterns of how we are, and until we are starting to heal ourselves, we'll continue to heal ourselves through another or within the relationship.
That's
Doesn't
right.
mean that you, if you're in the relationship, that you can't still do that with your partner. But a lot of the times we go into relationships for the wrong reasons, and we are
Yeah.
attracted to people for the wrong reasons. And I think,
Uh,
in the last episode, we talked about the inner child and the wounded inner child, and all the work that I have learned personally as well as professionally, that I
mhm.
realized that I had really been trying to heal the relationship with my father through all of these awesome, lovely men that have come into my life. And
Right.
until I started to work on that, I, did not realize that kind of subconscious pairing that we do. And so you have so many awesome points in your book. And I just kind of want to start off with this discussion
Yeah.
about the synergistically wounded pairing. And I love
Yeah.
that. So I'm going to just read this for my audience. When we meet and then fall in love with our partner, we don't realize that we are choosing a synergistically wounded partner with whom to play out our unresolved childhood emotional wounding in an attempt to heal that part. But that is what emotionally wounded people do. We search for someone who can uniquely help us process complicated emotional wounding from our child. And then you later say we are often attracted to our partner based on their healed parts as well, because this is the part we are ourselves are missing. Love
Yeah.
that. So I'm going to just, I know you say this in the book, but I'm going to just ask this. Are we completely screwed
No.
for all
No.
relationships? Because it's like, we're always going to have some element of woundedness that I think
Yeah.
we're all work in progress. You don't just graduate, right?
Right. Right. It's
So,
really on a continuum. So
okay.
if you think of a healed and wounded continuum, and we are throughout our lifespan, we're hopefully trending more toward the healed side as we do more of our interior work, as we develop ourselves more. So we're a combination of healed and wounded parts, but subconsciously, like you referenced before, subconsciously we are attracted to someone else to play out our inner child wounding, but we don't even realize this consciously. So I know I referenced earlier in my life, in my 20s, I was attracted to very narcissistically wounded people.
Oh, yeah.
So so I was like, oh, this is great. Um, but all I was doing was playing out my adult child of an alcoholic wounding with this narcissistic person. And I was fitting hand in glove. I was just like, oh, I know what to do. I know how to make myself smaller to fit into your world and all of that. Um, so thankfully, in my 20s, I got into therapy and began to realize what the heck I was doing and the patterns that I was repeating. But if I hadn't done that, Lindsay, I was at great risk for repeating that pattern and basically finding a watered down version of who I was with before.
Yep.
And that's typically what people do. They if they're not acknowledging this stuff, they're going through and saying, "Oh, okay, I'm just gonna. I know how to relate to this person. I know how to be with this type of person, make themselves smaller or cater to them, giving their power away essentially." And that's how people keep repeating these cycles.
Yeah, you have this list here, and I don't know if you're going to remember it. You know, of some of the here are some of the unhealed inner child woundings
Yeah.
that people subconsciously use to choose their partner. Um, so I'm going to read off one of them. And
Mm.
maybe if you remember them, I know you don't have the book in front of you because sometimes I don't remember half the stuff that I write. So if you were to ask me, so my partner yells at me just like my mom did. I chose them so I can try to find my authentic voice because I didn't feel like I had a voice as a child.
Yeah.
And then the other one is, and there's a bunch, but
Yeah.
my partner is emotionally shut down like my dad. I can use my mind reading skills to try to get my dad's attention. Can you talk more about that as to kind of why do we do that? And I know it's all subconscious, but I
Mhm.
guess the first question is, do we ever find it? Right? Do we, or is in those situations, are those relationships doomed until if we're continuing to look for mom or look for or heal mom's relationship or heal that in that relationship? So can you talk more about that?
Well, their relationships are not necessarily doomed. There's another example with that where I'm going to, make myself smaller and give my power away because I had an abusive sister and I let her control my life. So um, uh, we're not doomed, but what it's doing, what that wounding does, it sets us up for a relationship that's going to be unequal,
Mhm.
or a relationship that is going to have some struggles. And but that's normal and natural. And what I talk about in part two are all these synergistically wounded pairings, where I have um, the wounded hero and the rescued victim, or I have the tug of war couple, or the Bickersons couple, or the mind reading couple. And all of those are examples of how this wounding plays out in very normal, very typical relationships. But what I'm teaching is how to have better communication, how to have more intentional communication to create an open-hearted relationship. So that's what's going to heal a lot of these cycles, is if we can talk with our partners and say, look, this I got triggered today because you were saying this, and I'm trying not to do my mind reading with you today. I'm trying to be present. So are we okay? Are we good today? So that's one example of how to acknowledge our wounding and how it's showing up, and how to be more present and available in our relationships.
So I like to always say to my clients that if you are in a relationship, it doesn't matter with whom, romantic, work relationship, friends, family, whatever.
Yeah,
If you are, if there's a trigger and you are
yeah,
reacting
right,
beyond what I call, that functional adult, where you're like, hey,
right,
that didn't sound right. Do you want to repeat what you just said? I want to make sure I understood. If we're reacting any way other than that, right? We're
right.
having a wounded child response or a trauma response to that
We're having
trigger,
right. That's how our wounding is showing up.
right?
So if you're not if we are not reacting in a grounded way, then we're getting triggered, then our wounding is getting triggered, and then we're reacting in like a big outsized kind of way, yelling, kicking, punching, or we're shutting down, we're withdrawing, we're avoiding, we're being passive aggressive. So, what I ask people to do is to begin to recognize, okay, how is my wounding showing up? That's one of the first things I have them do in the first part of the book,
Yep.
is how's my wounding showing up in my relationships, to begin to recognize, okay, what's getting triggered within me, and how does it more typically show up? And of course, those are really our codependent, our wounded reactions, or our codependent behaviors that we learned in our childhood. And so we just brought our toolkit from childhood into our adult relationships. And now we're playing it out. And like you've referenced before, you don't have to be in a relationship to read this book. You could be dating, you could be considering dating, or you can look at your friendships, and how is your wounding showing up in your friendships? Because
Oh, yeah.
right? We don't have to be dating or married to somebody for this to show up.
I'm going to use a great example that happened with me just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah,
Um, it's with my girlfriends, and I was home on a Friday night, and I found out that all my girlfriends were out.
yeah,
And it's funny. I didn't even want to go out. I mean, I was
right,
actually like not in the mood, but I found
right.
out that they were, and I wasn't invited.
Yep,
And but because of all the work that I've done on myself,
yeah,
and the process of, I want to talk about that system, the acronym system that we're, one of them, the first one is stop, right?
yeah,
So I knew I was getting triggered, and this
yeah,
feeling of just feeling so left out.
yeah.
And I had to go, where does that come from? And so what I always ask my clients, and I do it for myself, is how old am I right now?
Yes,
And I'm like, oh, I'm about 14 when I didn't get invited to that concert. And I knew exactly.
yeah,
And then so there was a lot of, I think a lot with girls too. We have a lot of trauma from
yeah,
our friendships starting in middle school or getting left out. I had another situation in college where, and then I recognized, I said, so I sent a text and I said, hey, why didn't you invite me? And they said, oh my God, it was last minute. Do you want to come out? And I said, no, I'm good. But I recognized, so right then, that I almost got mad. I
yeah,
almost retreated,
yeah,
and then I probably would have been passive aggressive to them for like 2 or 3 days straight.
Mhm.
But I just said, oh, my feelings were hurt, but okay, never mind. And I recognize exactly where that came from. So I just want to bring that up to the listeners of how that stuff can show up in other ways.
I love how you did that internal process. That really is a testament to the work that you've done to be able to get there and do that, Lindsay. And so you're right. What I teach in the book is about a STAR reset process. So STAR is stop, think, act, reset, and repair. And so you stopped. You were like, okay, what's going on? How old do I feel right now? You were thinking about what do I want to do? What sort of action do I want to take? And what you went into that relationship and did that connection with your girlfriends is you said, okay, I need to reset something here because it doesn't feel right to me. And so you said, hey, why wasn't I invited? And they said, oh, we're sorry, whatever. And then you all repaired the relationship. So that's in a microcosm. Thank you
Yeah.
for bringing that up because that really is the process that I teach for you to use in your friendships and in your relationships because it's about repairing the connection. And then what you did is you cleaned it up. So you created what I call a clean transaction because you're like, hey, okay, we're good now. Instead of like what you were saying that in the past you would have carried that and been passive aggressive and all of that kind of stuff, and you would have your wounding would have taken over, and this is where your healed parts took over.
And this is where, if anyone is looking to say, well, Lindsay, you knew exactly where you were being triggered and you knew that. A lot of people don't even know that. Well, the reason why I know that is because I've done some deep inner child work where I actually have a list almost in a way of
Yeah.
here's my triggers and here's this, what I call with the programs and the coaching that I do, I call it, making a list of your I am nots. I'm not
Hmm.
worthy, I'm not being seen, I'm not good enough, I'm not invited, I'm always left out, those kinds of things.
Right.
And that's where I really want, if my listeners have not read your first book, to do that, because your first book really kind of covers what are all of those woundings, right?
Yeah.
Before you can apply them in a relationship, you got to know what your triggers are and where they come from so that you know that, this, I am getting triggered and my wounded child is showing up.
It really does help, and I do reference those in the second book as well, as far as like helping people identify the triggers, the codependent parts that are showing up, as well as some healed or functional parts that are showing up. And so it does help tremendously because what I'm going to be asking the reader to do is to look at their own wounding, how they're showing up, and then look at the wounding of either their current partner or a dating partners that they typically have,
Mm-hmm.
for them to be able to see how they're reacting, responding, how their wounded parts are synergistically connecting with someone else's wounded parts,
Mm-hmm.
because you will start to see patterns.
Oh, yeah. So one of the biggest questions I get from people is, how do I never meet a narcissist again? Or how do I
Right.
know, or they've been so burned by their last relationship that they don't trust themselves to not find another narcissist and repeat that pattern. And for anyone who asks that question, this is the work. This is how you avoid being in a relationship with a narcissist. And I want to talk about, you have this one little thing about red flags and
Yeah.
red flag warnings. And I'm going to read something that is really, I just love the way you wrote it. Um, but that is, when you are dating and when you're just starting to get out there, that's where you start to have to scan and go, what are the red flags? Well, it's hard to know what the red flags are if you haven't really done any kind of this, your own wounding examination, right? So
Right.
to someone who has not fully healed themselves, they're going to miss those red flags, right?
Yeah, a wounded heart cannot see another wounded heart. That's why hurt people find other hurt people.
Well, you just totally read my my quote that I was going to say.
Oh
That's good
gosh.
though. A wound, I'm going to read it. A wounded heart cannot clearly see, hear, or feel red flags because the pain coming from the other person isn't recognized as a major problem. A wounded lens distorts the view. So perfectly stated. I love that.
Right. And that's, I think we've all found ourselves in those positions of where uh, our wounding, is again saying, oh, well, this person is really nice to me or whatever, or they do this. But the wounding is not checking in and seeing all the things, all the say, the passive aggressive comments they're making or the sarcastic comments. The wounded part is like, oh, well, they're just being funny, so our wounded parts will make a lot of excuses for the red flags, and that's really how people get messed up. And so a key component is about boundary setting. And so in the book, I also talk about boundary setting as well, because it's so important for us to recognize checking in with ourselves. How is this person? How do I feel with this person? Do I feel like I can be myself, or do I have to be a smaller version of myself?
Well, I'm going to read a little list of an inventory of red flags because this stuff is really good. I think I can change the things I don't like about them. And
Yeah.
what's interesting is that that's a first red flag. I don't think that's a red flag people would see. So what you just did is you spun it around to us, right?
Yeah.
So typically the red flag is, he's late all the time, right?
But I made it about ourselves, the
Yes.
reader, right?
That's what I think is brilliant and so important. They always tell me that something is my fault and that I can't do anything right. They are angry a lot. That's a big one. They never tell me that I am loved, but they will say this to the dog. Ooh, that rings so
Uh,
true in my life. I
I
can't even tell you.
I know.
I, I work so hard to get them to talk, but I can't read minds. That's a really good one. I
Yeah.
can't read minds. How much do we try to read minds as wounded
Well,
children?
totally. I mean, that's our insecure, wounded parts that we're trying to fill in the blanks. And like, if you hadn't have called your or texted your girlfriends, you would have spent a lot of time that other night mind reading. You would
Yeah.
have filled in a lot of blanks with all of these insecurities.
Yeah, it's the story we make up. It's the bullshit.
Right.
So you've heard me say, I don't know if
And
you've
then we
heard me
start
say,
to believe it.
yeah, the belief system is BS, right? So that's why I call it bullshit. So our belief system is a collection of thoughts that were stored from our past, which created the belief system. So that belief system in that moment was, well, I always get left out, right? But that's
And then
bullshit.
that feeds into the false narrative that we
Yeah.
carry. And then that becomes this identity of, well, this is who I am.
Yeah. So I want to just read another one. There's a longer list, but I think their addiction isn't that bad. Everyone has something and nobody's perfect. And then you go on to say, they are explanations people say to themselves to make red flags fit into their narrative. And our ability to see and identify red flags warnings is tied to the degree that we are emotionally healed. If we ourselves are as wounded as our partners, then we don't see the red flag warnings at all. We just see them as personality traits.
Yeah.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. I'd
And
say that most of us we're like, oh, that's kind of cute. They do that sometimes, right? And then you say, what we think is cute in the beginning of the relationship turns out to be the thing that we can't stand the most.
exactly. Yeah, because we think, oh, well, they're so laid back and funny. And then later we're like, okay, I really wish this person had more motivation. And it's like, well, but what attracted you was that they were laid back and funny, but now you want them to have more motivation. And that's what I see a lot in therapy. And I'll ask the person, I'll say, so how were they at the beginning? And they're like, well, they've always been like this. I'm like, yeah, they've
Uh-huh.
always been like this, but now 5, 10 years later, they're sort of waking up, they're more healed, and so they're seeing and experiencing the relationship so differently now, and so they're like, "Well, I don't like that part." I'm like, "I know, because you 'cause you're more healed now, you can see it."
Yeah. Yeah. So that actually leads me to something because I think about I've been in relationships where that you what you just said is what has happened.
Yeah,
So what do you do when you're in those situations and you're like, but I don't like that part of him, let's say.
mhm.
Um, Now are we going to trying to change them? Are we going to ask them to change? Because maybe they just can't. So now we're having to accept something that we don't like. And that's when I think so many people are like, well, I can't accept it, so I got to get out of the relationship. What do you do in
That's
that
right,
situation?
that's right, a lot of people will say it's unacceptable to me, and it may be, but what that really is it's the invitation for communication. So it's the invitation for you to go to your partner and say, "Hey, I really am struggling with I need more help from you around the house, or I need help with the kids, and I need you to show up more." And so you're communicating intentionally and with love and from a grounded place. And then it's up to your partner if they're going to be able to step up or not. But it's important that you express yourself. So that's recognizing an internal boundary. And then you're expressing it externally and saying, "Hey, I need this," expressing a need. And then they might be able to or not, but at least you know that you tried.
Yeah. And that's the best we can do. I always say it's the best you can do. You can do your best and they can do their best. And if you guys come together doing your best or you just don't.
Or you
But
don't.
I want to go back to the red flags things for a second because this is, another question I get quite a bit is well, how do you know when do you see a red flag? And you said uh, one rule that I teach regarding recognizing red flags is to say no to something you don't want and see how your partner responds. It sounds so simple, right? But I will
Hmm.
say this, what I wanted to kind of caveat is I know in the beginning of a relationship, I'm in one now, right? Saying no is actually the hard part, right?
Hmm.
Especially if you're dating and especially if you really
Yep.
like them. And I know why, because I have actually discussed this with my partner about
Hmm.
saying no. Saying no is a red flag for me that I have a hard time saying no.
Yeah.
And that
Right.
is fear of abandonment. If I say
Right.
no, they may not like it and they'll leave.
Right. Right.
But then
Yeah.
you say
You're.
the saying, I'm just going to complete that for a second. Then you say, but if you have the guts to say it,
Yeah.
tell me about a red flag of a behavior. So if I'd said no, what would be a red flag behavior trait?
If you say no and your dating partner comes back and says, "Well, what do you mean no? I want to go have Mexican food tonight, and we need to do that." If they're not respecting your no, then that's a huge red flag because it's telling you that they're making it all about them and they're controlling in some way. But the bottom line is that they're not respecting you. They're not respecting your feelings. And so it is such a simple little exercise. And I think what you were saying before is that when we're first dating, everybody's kind of on their best behavior. So some dating partners will be like, "Okay, we can do this or whatever." But in time, if you say no and they're not respecting your no, big red flag. It's a simple process. I'm working with a gal now who she said, "Okay, I tried your little thing about saying no." And she said, "He really is respecting me." And she said, "It feels so different than my last relationship where I didn't feel respected at all."
Hmm.
And so it was really eye opening for her to see that, okay, I can say no and he's not going to run away and he's still going to like me and he's going to respect me.
Yeah, and I think too of when you say no, it could be even the red flag could be even more subtle where it doesn't even appear red. Maybe it's like pink, right? But it could
Right.
be, and then it turns
Right.
into red over time, which is, well, I don't, I'm not really in the mood for Mexican. And then, he may not say, well, I want Mexican, right? But he might say, well, they'll do things to just change your mind, right?
Yep.
Where
Yep.
ultimately you agree and you're almost rewarded in that moment for making a good decision,
Yep.
right? So they're rewarding. So they might compliment you of like, thank you so much for seeing my way, or you're so
Yep.
amenable, or I love how flexible you are, right? So you've
Uh-huh.
just been rewarded of this little cookie of here's what happens. You're rewarded when you change your mind.
Yeah, and that's, of course, that takes us into gaslighting.
Yep.
And right, and so that's where some manipulators are so good at gaslighting us and manipulating us into thinking that they're going along with us, but they're really not. It's really about their agenda. So the more you can be aware of how you feel in these relationships and being honest with yourself and say, okay, how was that date? How do I feel when I'm with him or her? What's that like? Do I feel safe? Do I feel like I can be myself? Or do I feel I need to change myself? So that's really the self check. And if you feel that you can just be yourself and show up and they're showing up authentically, that's beautiful.
Hmm. I want to also talk real quick before we close, because this is a really important thing, and you mentioned about love bombing.
Yep. Yep.
And I highlighted a good chunk of this in the book because this is something that I see with my clients, as well as kind of the questions that I get, right?
Yes.
And I'm going to just read it. Love bombing. You're being loaded up with affection, gifts, and adoration. And initially it feels amazing, but it is important to discern whether your partner's actions match their words. Healthy relationships are not an emotional roller coaster. An emotional, healthy love is consistent. And I want to really talk about just that one thing for a second, because um, I for gosh, I think of just dating and how much I've been love bombed. And I really thought that they were just excited about me,
Yeah.
but one of the things that I was in a dating scenario not that long ago where it was like, God, you're so this, you're so that. And I got to tell you, that shit feels good. I mean,
Hmm.
it is so hard to not, to like not absorb it and let it just like take over, like, getting heroin. Right.
I know, right?
And after, and so, but then I would have all of that, like, you're so great, you're so great. But then I wouldn't hear from him for a couple days, like, or
Hmm.
you're not getting that text or whatever. So it didn't match. Right. So
Yeah.
what I noticed is the person that I was with one on one was like amazing, awesome. It felt so good. But then when
Yeah.
I was pretty much out of sight or out of mind or whatever, whoever, I have no idea what was going on in that
Hmm.
situation. Um, but I knew it was a red flag because of what you just said, an emotional roller coaster. I felt really good when we were together, like really high.
Yeah.
And
Right.
then when he would leave, it was like this low, like,
Yeah.
right away that was a
Love
red
bomb.
flag.
And love bombing is so confusing for all the reasons that you put out there. But it's stepping back from all the gifts and the adoration and saying, okay, what does this relationship feel like to me? Does it feel consistent? Does it feel reciprocal? Does it feel authentic? Or does it feel like he's just coming in or she's just coming in and giving me all of this stuff and projecting all of this stuff onto me? Or does it feel balanced and nice and even? So, is it being given gifts and adoration is great. And if it continues, that's great. Because love bombing is about the gifts and adoration, and then it's about the steep drop off where then the person is coming back and they're being really mean and diminishing and
Or just
tearing us down
ignoring, or just even
or ignoring.
ignoring.
Yeah. Yeah, it
That's
could be just that ignoring, that
that to me is
avoidance.
more subtle of like, well, Lindsay, we had this great date and oh my
Yeah.
God, it was so like we spent the whole weekend together. It was great. And it's now Wednesday and I haven't heard from him. That's a
Yeah.
red flag.
It's it's a red flag, and I appreciate you making that distinction because that's so true. that even that avoidance is a red flag, and saying, okay, this doesn't feel right to me. So it's trusting your gut. A big
Yeah.
rule of boundary setting is check in with your gut. How does my gut feel in this situation? If you're like, well, it just doesn't feel right or something's off, then trust yourself. We're taught so much to override that gut reaction, and that really is how our codependency just goes kind of crazy in these situations. We give more power to that than we do to our gut reaction or our intuition.
And I really want to point something out in addition to the trusting your gut is be careful. I tell this in my book about asking other people for advice so that you could check in with your gut. So
Yep.
what your reality is different from your friends. It's different from this guy that you're wondering
Mm.
about. So trusting your gut is not only just that, but it's just accepting your reality, right?
Accepting your reality. Yep. And not making up stories so those red flags will fit your narrative.
Exactly, exactly. And the other thing too with as you go into a healthy relationship, and this is kind of what happened as I've gotten um healthier,
Yeah.
uh is when a guy and I started dating, if I was starting to date him, I would like if he would say, "Wow, you're so great. You're so accomplished," or whatever, I will just say, well, wait a minute, you don't know me right now. Like, thank you so much for saying this. But I will almost it's not that I'm rejecting the compliment or anything, but it's almost as though I think a sign that you are getting further healed is that when someone is even love bombing you or adoring you, you almost don't even connect with it because you don't need it. That's I don't know if I'm not saying the right thing, but do you know what I mean? Like
Well,
you just don't need it.
you're not so reliant on a sense of self from
Right.
outside of yourself. And so what you're doing, which is beautiful, is you're generating that internal sense of who you are. And so you've created that authenticity. You've tapped into that self, and it's like, well, thank you for telling me all of these great things, but I don't need it from you.
Mhm.
But it's great to receive it from you, and so thank you. But you're right, so many people, we will give so much power to others to create our sense of self and to create our identity. And
Mhm.
of course, that's an internal boundary that's all kind of fuzzy and non-existent, and that's our own internal red flag that we have to watch out for because that's our wounding. And unless we're really conscious of that, that's the wounding that's going to pick someone else who's just as wounded, and we blend together.
Yeah, and I give this exercise to my clients. I'll say it to anyone is, if you're about to go on a date, or you're just in the process of dating, or you're getting online, and God, that's always an ego killer of doing any online dating apps. But make
Yeah.
a list of the 50 things that are make you awesome,
Mm.
and shower yourself with, love bomb yourself sometimes. That's okay. It doesn't make you narcissistic. It really, and I think that's a thing that people are so worried about, of just self-love
Oh
is
yeah,
not narcissism. In fact, narcissism is the opposite of self-love, right?
that's
And
right.
and
That's right.
codependency is the opposite of self-love. So make a
Yeah.
list, make a list of all the things that are awesome about you, and so then when someone is starting to say and love bomb and all of that, you're not getting sucked into it. And I think that's just a really important thing that I really wanted to call out, that I think is really important for you in your book when you start to say that. And then as you get further into the book, tell us, and I can't unfortunately get through every chapter because I love it, but tell us what the reader can expect more, after kind of talking about red flags and things like that.
No, that's good. So what I take the reader through is a process of understanding about intentional communication, how to speak your truth, how to get into the difficult topics like what you did with your girlfriends, of what I say conversation openers. Like, I have something I have to tell you, and this is really hard for me to say. Or do you have some time? Because I really want to sit down and for us to talk about this. I really am troubled by this. So it's understanding intentional communication, understanding, I'm teaching about heartfelt apologies, which a lot of couples don't do a good job. So so this is the repair part of the relationship dynamic of really helping couples understand. Okay, this is how you can repair this and how you can move forward in your relationship. Because what we're gearing gearing up for is this open-hearted connection with each other. And I give lots of different examples. Part two are all these different examples of pairings of couples who have had real struggles and how they work through those struggles. So I'm demonstrating for the reader, this is how to apply what everything you learned in part one, and this is how it plays out in these relationships. So you can see how it, it brought couples closer. It's helping them to touch base with their authentic selves.
I love it.
And then thank you. And then part three is about open-hearted connection. There's a beautiful, absolutely beautiful meditation that I give couples to do with each other, facing each other to really open up their heart center so they can be present and available with each other in a deeper way. And then also more about boundary setting.
And again, if you're not in a relationship, read it. Go read all of it. Don't just say, "Well, I'm not in a relationship, I'm not going to read that part." Because I think it's really important that you now have a framework of oh, that's what a healthy relationship is. So you're going to enter more into that, whether you're in a relationship or not.
And you're also going to, like we talked about before, you're going to see how this is showing up in your friendships.
Mm.
It's not just about dating or love relationships, but it's also about friendships, because those stories, like I have people examples of how one couple, that one partner overshared and would tell all these stories on her husband. The husband tells stories about the wife, and she's just like, "Why are you doing this to me? This really hurts me." Or of course the Bickersons, where they're just yelling at each other all the time,
The
or the tug of
Bickersons.
yes.
I like that one.
And then the tug of war couples, or relationships where there's overt controlling and covert controlling. So the overt is someone telling you what to do, but the covert is all the passive aggressiveness. And
Mm.
so that shows up in our work life, in our friendship life, in our relationships. So yeah, you don't have to be in a relationship right now to read this book, because you're going to be learning a lot about how you show up in all of your relationships.
That is so important. Well, Robert, good luck with the book. I'm sure it's already doing very well. I really encourage anyone on this podcast to get it. And I don't bring every author onto my show that contacts me. So this is a really important book, and I really want everyone to go out and get it. Robert,
Thank you.
how else can the listeners find you? And I know you have a YouTube channel. Why don't you say that? Mention that.
Yeah, so my YouTube channel is The Art of Practical Wisdom. And so folks can find more videos that I'm posting of topics like we're talking about today. And then your viewers and listeners can also find my books on Amazon.com. And so I really appreciate you having me back on your show. I just love our connection.
Me
And I,
too.
I really appreciate, I think it means so much. And I want to tell your viewers and listeners this, that it means so much, Lindsay, that you've done your own work. And so you can really help so many people because you've healed such big parts of yourself. And
Right.
so you can go into this work, excuse me, you can go into this work from a healed place and really spread that to so many other people. So good job.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you. Well, everyone, thank you for coming to the show today, and I'll see you guys next time.